The mall was buzzing with life. The sounds of footsteps and muted conversations blended with the soft music playing in the background. Lisa, Jessica, and Sam strolled along the storefronts, chatting cheerfully and snapping random pictures on their phones. It was an ordinary evening, nothing special. A day when they decided to hang out and take a break from their everyday worries. "Let's take another photo," Lisa suggested, spotting a cluster of bright red advertising balloons hanging on chains near the entrance. "Let's pose as if we're holding them up on our shoulders," added Jessica, already aiming her phone's camera. Sam, usually the most serious of the three, was eager to join in this time. She stood next to Lisa, pretending to balance a huge balloon on her shoulder. Lisa mimicked trying to hold it up, while Jessica snapped a few shots, laughing along with her friends. Just then, a cheerful voice interrupted their fun. "Hi, girls, can I join you?" Turning around, the girls saw a young woman standing nearby. She was dressed in a stylish black dress that accentuated her figure, and her blonde hair was neatly styled. Her eyes sparkled under the warm lighting, and a confident, friendly smile played on her lips. Hi," Lisa responded, a little surprised by the stranger's sudden appearance. "Sure, join us. We're just goofing around." "Thanks," the woman said, stepping closer. "My name is Emily." Jessica quickly looked Emily over, noting her impeccable style and well-groomed appearance. "We were just taking a few photos for fun," Sam explained, holding her phone. "Want to join us?" "I actually have something else in mind," Emily said, moving even closer. There was a strange confidence in her voice that made the girls wary. "I can perform a cleansing ritual for you. Right here in the parking lot, under the starry sky. It'll be something special." Lisa, always up for an adventure, smiled and glanced at her friends. "Is this a joke?" she asked, somewhat skeptically. "Not at all," Emily replied, her smile unwavering. "It's a ritual that will cleanse your energy and give you a special sense of freedom and peace." Jessica squinted, trying to figure out the catch. "That sounds kind of weird," she said, but Lisa had already taken her hand. "Let's try it," Lisa suggested, laughing. "What could happen? It's just for fun." Sam shrugged, though deep down she didn't like the idea. "Okay," she conceded, "but if this turns out to be some kind of prank, I'm the first one running." Emily nodded and led them toward the exit, where the vast parking lot stretched out under the clear night sky. The girls followed her, unaware that this evening, which started as innocent fun, would soon become a nightmare that would change their lives forever. The mall parking lot felt unusually quiet. Flickering lights illuminated the rows of parked cars, and the silence of the night only intensified the strange feeling that began to creep into the girls' minds. Lisa, Jessica, and Sam stopped near their car, watching Emily, who was walking slowly ahead of them, as if expecting something important. "What are we supposed to do?" Jessica asked with slight nervousness, crossing her arms over her chest. Emily turned to them and smiled, but this time, her smile lacked the friendliness it had before. She looked serious, almost focused. "Stand in a circle and hold hands," she said quietly but confidently. Confused but still treating it as a joke, the girls complied. Lisa and Sam took Jessica's hands, and all three stood there in the empty parking lot under the open night sky. Waiting, Emily stood in front of them and closed her eyes. She began to whisper something under her breath, the words almost indistinguishable, but with each syllable, the tension in the air grew. Lisa, who usually went along with any fun idea, now felt a shiver run down her spine. "Hey, what are you saying?" She tried to joke, but her voice sounded uncertain. Emily suddenly opened her eyes and reached out, gently touching Lisa's forehead. The cold touch made Lisa flinch. Emily continued to whisper, but now the words became clearer, filling the air with a strange, ominous rhythm. "We are gathered here to free souls from the weight of their sins," Emily said, her voice growing firmer. "Cleansing is necessary for those who are lost, who are forgotten in this life." Jessica felt her heart start to pound harder. Something in Emily's voice felt wrong, too sincere, and frightening. She glanced at Lisa and Sam, hoping to see the same unease in their eyes, but they seemed just as bewildered. Emily began touching their foreheads one by one, and each of them felt a cold surge, as if something foreign was trying to penetrate inside. At first, it was a slight tingling, but with each passing second, it grew stronger, turning into a terrifying pressure. "Your energy carries the mark of forgotten souls," Emily continued, her voice trembling. I see them, they are here, they are with you. Suddenly, Emily began to cry, tears streaming down her cheeks. But these were not ordinary tears, they carried a deep, desperate pain. You are the forgotten souls, she whispered through her tears, and the girls heard a plea in her voice. Forgotten in this life, lost forever. By now, Lisa could no longer hide her fear. She tried to pull away from the circle, but Emily held their hands tightly, as if afraid they would vanish if she let go. Stop it, Jessica shouted, her voice louder than she intended. Emily, stop, this isn't funny. But Emily seemed not to hear her. She continued to cry and mutter under her breath until she collapsed to her knees in front of them. As if her strength had left her, Lisa finally freed herself from Emily's grip and jumped back, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. She looked at Jessica and Sam, and their faces made it clear they were experiencing the same terror. Let's get out of here, Sam whispered urgently, grabbing Lisa's hand. Jessica nodded silently, and the girls, casting one last glance at Emily, who was still sobbing on the ground, ran to the car. As Lisa started the engine, she nervously glanced back several times. But Emily no longer moved. As the car screeched out of the parking lot, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. She glanced in the rearview mirror, but the parking lot was empty, as if that ominous scene had never happened at all. Night had swallowed the city, and the windows of Lisa's house were drowned in darkness. Her room was quiet, but even in that silence, something felt off. Lisa lay in her bed, covered up to her chin with a blanket, but sleep stubbornly refused to come. Her eyes were wide open, her thoughts swirling like a carousel, and the events of the evening kept replaying in her mind. It's just nerves, she kept telling herself, trying to convince herself that everything that had happened was just a bad joke, perhaps even a staged scene. Emily was just a strange girl, and the ritual was nothing more than a silly game. But the more she tried to believe this, the less convinced she was by her own words. Lisa turned onto her side and closed her eyes, hoping the darkness behind her eyelids would bring some peace. However, after a few minutes, something made her open her eyes again. She listened carefully. The house was quiet, only the faint ticking of the clock on her nightstand broke the silence. But then she heard a rustling sound. It was barely perceptible, like someone slowly moving across the carpet in another room. Lisa froze, straining to listen, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. Her heart started beating faster. Maybe it's just the wind, she thought, but doubt had already crept into her mind. She tried to dismiss the noise, but it persisted, growing more distinct. Lisa sat up in bed, holding her breath, and listened again. This time, it seemed the sound was coming from the hallway, right outside her bedroom door. Soft footsteps, as if someone was pacing back and forth, getting closer. Her body tensed, and her palms grew cold with fear. It's just nerves, she repeated to herself. But her heart was already pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of her chest. Unable to bear it any longer, Lisa suddenly turned on the bedside lamp. The room filled with soft light, pushing the darkness into the corners. She sat there, staring at the door, but nothing happened. The rustling had stopped, and the house was silent once again. Lisa swallowed nervously and got out of bed. She walked slowly to the door, trying not to make a sound, and, holding her breath, she turned the handle. The door creaked open, and her gaze shot into the dark hallway. But there was nothing, only silence and the familiar shapes of the furniture. Lisa exhaled, trying to shake off the growing panic, and closed the door. Returning to bed, she lay down again and wrapped herself tightly in the blanket, deciding to leave the light on until morning. But as soon as she lay back down, she thought she saw a shadow flicker in the corner of the room. It could have been just a reflection from the window or a trick of the light. But her heart tightened with fear. Lisa clutched the blanket to her chest, feeling goosebumps spread across her back. Suddenly, right next to her bed, she heard a whisper. It was barely audible, but clear enough to make Lisa's blood run cold. The voice was muffled, as if it were coming from far away, but somehow it was also right beside her, as if someone was standing close. This can't be real, she thought, clutching the blanket tighter. It's just my imagination. But deep down, she knew something had changed. An invisible fear, born that night in the parking lot, had followed her even here, to her own home. And no matter how much Lisa tried to convince herself that everything happening was just a result of frayed nerves, the anxiety wouldn't let her go. She felt that something much more sinister was hiding in the darkness, something she couldn't escape. The night was long and restless, full of dark shadows and rustling sounds she couldn't ignore. And when the first rays of morning light began to break through the windows, Lisa was still lying there, wide awake, gripped by the fear that had now firmly taken root in her heart. Morning arrived too quickly, and the first rays of the sun barely dispelled the fear that had haunted Lisa throughout the night. She had spent the rest of the night lying in bed, unable to sleep, and now, tired and tense, she made her way to the kitchen for some coffee. The bitterness of the strong drink was supposed to help her pull herself together, but her thoughts kept returning to the strange ritual and the unsettling night. The phone on the table was silent. Usually, by this time, Jessica would have already sent several messages in their group chat, but Lisa's phone remained quiet. She glanced at the screen and decided to send a message first. Lisa, good morning. How did you sleep? I honestly barely got any sleep. I can't stop thinking about last night. A few minutes passed, but there was no response. Lisa frowned, but she figured Jessica might not have heard the notification or had left her phone in another room. Sam was also silent. Lisa dialed her number and tried to sound calm when Sam picked up. Hey, Sam, have you talked to Jessica? She's not responding. Hi, Sam replied, sounding tired. No, I texted her, but she hasn't answered yet. Maybe she's still asleep. Maybe, Lisa said slowly, though something inside told her that wasn't the case. The hours passed and the sun climbed higher, but there was still no word from Jessica. Lisa tried calling her several times, but her phone was off. Sam also tried calling and texting, but to no avail. By noon, Lisa could no longer hide her growing concern. Sam, don't you think this is strange? She asked during their latest call. Jessica is usually always reachable, she wouldn't just turn off her phone like this. Sam was silent for a moment, as if considering her response. Maybe something happened? She suggested cautiously. But, yeah, you're right, this isn't like her. Listen, I'll try to stop by her place. Maybe her phone just died. And she didn't hear the alarm. Okay, Lisa agreed, though Sam couldn't see her nodding. If you see her, tell her to call me back. The sun slowly dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson, as Sam parked her car in front of Jessica's house. The nagging feeling that had been haunting her all day had now become almost unbearable. She sat in the car for a few minutes, trying to steady the trembling in her hands. Sam had tried to convince herself multiple times that nothing was wrong. Finally, she stepped out of the car and headed towards Jessica's house. As she climbed the porch steps, Sam noticed that the door was slightly ajar. Her heart skipped a beat. Jess? She called out, gently pushing the door open. There was no response, and Sam stepped inside. The house was quiet, too quiet. Sam looked around. At first glance, everything seemed normal. The furniture was in its usual place. Jessica's shoes were by the entryway, and her jacket hung on the coat rack. But something still felt off. Sam slowly walked into the living room. On the coffee table lay Jessica's phone. Next to it were her car keys and purse. It all looked as if she had just stepped out for a moment, but that feeling was deceptive. Sam checked every room in the house, growing more convinced that Jessica wasn't there. Her bed was neatly made. There were unwashed cups on the kitchen counter, and a towel, still slightly damp from a morning shower, hung in the bathroom. Jessica, Sam called out again, but her voice echoed into the emptiness. Sam returned to the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, scanning the room in the hopes of spotting something, anything, that might explain what had happened. But there wasn't the slightest indication that Jessica had planned to leave. All her clothes were in place, her shoes were by the door, just as usual. It was as if she had simply vanished. The anxiety grew. Sam pulled out her phone and tried calling Jessica's number again, even though her phone was right in front of her. The call rang out into the silence. Sam's fingers trembled as she dialed Lisa's number. Lisa picked up almost immediately. Well, are you at her place? Lisa asked, tension evident in her voice. Yes, I'm here, Sam replied slowly, trying to keep her voice steady. But Lisa, she's not here. Everything's in place, her phone, keys, purse, but Jessica's gone. And the door was open when I arrived. There was a moment of silence before Lisa responded. Are you sure? Maybe she just stepped out for something and will be back soon? This isn't normal. She wouldn't leave all this behind and just go. Something's wrong. Oh my God? Lisa whispered, fear creeping into her voice. We have to do something, Sam. We need to call the police. Yes, Sam agreed, though the thought of explaining this strange situation to someone else terrified her. I'll head over to your place. We'll call them together. After ending the call, Sam took one last look around the house. The feeling that she and Lisa were being drawn into something far more serious than just a missing friend grew stronger with each minute she spent in Jessica's empty home. She hurriedly left the house, making sure to close the door tightly behind her. Once in the car, Sam glanced back at the house before starting the engine and driving away. Thoughts of that strange encounter with Emily and her ominous words swirled in her mind. But now Sam knew one thing for sure: something dark and terrifying had entered their lives, and Jessica was the first to confront it. Lisa and Sam sat on the hard chairs in the dimly lit room of the police station. Both looked exhausted. A sleepless night and the anxiety over Jessica had left their marks on their faces. Lisa nervously twisted the ring on her finger, casting worried glances at Sam, who stared intently at the door. Finally, the door creaked open, and Detective Mark Jenkins entered the room. Tall and solidly built, with short cropped dark hair and attentive eyes, he carried himself with a calm yet confident demeanor. Jenkins closed the door behind him and took a seat across from the girls, laying out a notepad and pen in front of him. Lisa, Sam, correct? He asked, looking at each of them in turn. They both nodded. I'm Detective Mark Jenkins. I've been assigned to your case. I understand you're worried, but let's start from the beginning. Tell me, when was the last time you saw Jessica? Sam was the first to speak, trying to keep her voice steady. We were at the mall last night, she began, glancing around the room as if searching for the right words. We were just walking around, taking pictures. Then this girl approached us. She introduced herself as Emily and offered to perform a cleansing ritual in the parking lot. A cleansing ritual? Jenkins repeated, raising an eyebrow. There was a mix of curiosity and professional caution in his eyes. Yes, Lisa confirmed, continuing the story. It was strange, but we thought it was a joke. We followed her to the parking lot, and she started chanting prayers, touching our foreheads. At first, it seemed silly, but then she started crying and calling us forgotten souls. The whole thing was really unsettling. Jenkins listened intently, not interrupting. When Lisa finished, he asked the next question. And what happened next? We just left, Sam said, shaking her head. I thought that was the end of it, but today Jessica didn't respond to any messages. I went to her house, and she wasn't there. All her things were in place, but she was gone. Jenkins jotted down a few notes in his notepad. When did you last see Jessica? What time? Around 10 in the evening. Lisa replied. We dropped her off, said goodbye, and she went inside. Got it. Now, tell me about this Emily. What did she look like? Had you seen her before? No, we'd never seen her before, Sam said. Sam hesitated, searching for the right description. She looked unusual, very stylish, with long blonde hair, and wearing a beautiful dress. It seemed like she had just come from some event and happened to stop by the mall. Jenkins wrote something down again. All right, I'll try to find out who this Emily is. She might be connected to Jessica's disappearance. But for now, we need to establish her last known movements. You're saying her belongings were left behind, but there were no signs of her leaving? Yes, Sam confirmed. Her phone, keys, purse, everything was there. The door was slightly open, but there were no signs of a struggle or anything like that. The detective pondered for a moment, processing what he had heard. Then he looked at the girls, his gaze softening. We'll start the investigation immediately, he said firmly. First, we'll review the surveillance footage from the mall and around Jessica's house. We'll also try to track down this Emily. I know the situation looks frightening, but I ask you not to lose hope. We'll do everything we can to find your friend. Lisa and Sam nodded, feeling a slight sense of relief that the matter was in professional hands. But the fear for Jessica remained. As Detective Jenkins left, both girls realized that this was just the beginning, and that a difficult investigation lay ahead, one that might uncover much more than they were prepared to face. Gray clouds covered the sky, casting a gloomy hue over the city. The rain tapped against the windows of the police station, creating a constant background noise. Detective Mark Jenkins sat at his cluttered desk, carefully studying the documents scattered before him. His gaze was focused, his brows furrowed. The case of Jessica's disappearance was becoming more tangled. Next to him, on the computer monitor, were open surveillance footage clips from the mall. The screen was frozen on an image of Lisa, Sam, and Jessica standing next to the mysterious girl named Emily. Mark zoomed in, trying to get a clearer view of her features. "Campbell, come over here for a minute," he called to the young officer passing by. Officer Campbell, a tall guy with a ruddy complexion, stepped closer, peering over the detective's shoulder at the screen. "What do you have, sir?" Have you seen this girl before?" Mark asked, pointing to Emily on the screen. Campbell squinted, studying the image carefully, then shook his head. "Doesn't ring a bell. New face." Mark tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the desk. "Something about her seems familiar to me. Run a check in the database for matches on her description and photo. We might already have information on her." "Yes, sir," Campbell nodded and went to carry out the task. Mark leaned back in his chair and rubbed his tired eyes. The case was taking a strange turn. Jessica's disappearance was inexplicable, and now this mysterious Emily had become a key figure in the investigation. A few hours later, Campbell returned, holding some printed documents. His face showed clear excitement. "Sir, I found something," he said, handing the papers to Mark. The detective quickly skimmed through the documents, and his expression grew serious. "Is this confirmed information?" "Yes, sir. The name might be different, but the description and appearance match. She shows up in footage from 3 other disappearances over the past 6 months. In all cases, the circumstances were strange, and the disappearances remain unsolved." Mark delved into the reports. They described 3 different cases of missing persons: a young man who vanished after a party, a middle-aged woman who disappeared on her way home, and a teenager last seen in a park. In each case, a girl resembling Emily was spotted on surveillance footage near the missing persons. "Damn it," Mark muttered, realizing the gravity of the situation. Why didn't anyone connect these cases before? Probably because of the different locations and circumstances, Campbell suggested. But now, with this new information, the picture is becoming clearer. Mark thought for a moment, then stood up decisively. "We need more information. Get in touch with the departments that handled these cases. Have them send over everything they have, and pull up archives on similar cases over the past few years. This might be just the tip of the iceberg." "Understood, sir," Campbell replied and hurried to carry out the order. Mark sat back down, feeling the weight of responsibility. He realized he was dealing with something far more serious than just a random disappearance. They might be facing a serial abductor or something even more sinister. Meanwhile, Lisa and Sam were sitting in a small cafe not far from the police station. Both looked exhausted and worried. Lisa nervously stirred her cooling coffee with a spoon, while Sam stared out the window, watching people pass by. "What do you think they found in there?" Lisa asked quietly, breaking the silence. "I don't know," Sam sighed. "But I hope it's some kind of lead. I can't stand waiting and not knowing anything anymore." Lisa nodded, her eyes filled with anxiety. "I keep thinking about that Emily. Who is she? Why haven't we seen her before? And how is she connected to Jessica's disappearance?" Sam shrugged, her expression turning thoughtful. "Maybe she's part of some cult or something like that. Remember how strange she acted in the parking lot? Those things she said about forgotten souls." Lisa shuddered at the memory. "Yeah, it was creepy. But who would have thought things would go this far?" At that moment, the cafe door opened, and Detective Jenkins walked in. He quickly scanned the room and, spotting the girls, made his way to their table. Lisa and Sam immediately tensed, anticipating news. "Hello, ladies," Mark greeted them as he sat down. His face was serious, but there was a spark of determination in his eyes. "Do you have any news?" Sam asked impatiently. Mark nodded, folding his hands on the table. "Yes, and it's quite serious. We've discovered that the girl you met, this Emily, might be connected to several other disappearances that have occurred over the past 6 months." Lisa's eyes widened in surprise and horror. What disappearances?" "At least 3 cases," Mark clarified. "All the victims vanished under strange circumstances, and in each case, A girl resembling your Emily was seen nearby. Sam covered her mouth with her hand, trying to process what she had just heard. So, she's hunting people? But why? How? Mark sighed, looking at the girls with sympathy. We don't know the motives or details yet. But now we have a direction for the investigation. We're gathering all the information we can and we'll try to find this girl. You might be able to help us by recalling any details about her or that evening. Lisa thought hard, trying to remember every little detail. She looked too perfect, if that makes sense. Like she stepped out of a magazine cover. And her behavior was strange, friendly at first, then suddenly frightening. Sam added, and when she touched us during the ritual, I felt cold, like an icy breeze was coming from her. Mark listened carefully, jotting down every detail. That could be important. Any little thing could help. If you remember anything else, let me know right away. The girls nodded, still processing the information they had just received. We will find Jessica, Mark said confidently as he stood up. I promise you. After the detective left, Lisa and Sam exchanged anxious looks. The situation was becoming more frightening, and they now realized that they were dealing with something far beyond the ordinary. The weak morning sunlight barely penetrated the heavy clouds, casting the city in a dull gray hue. Detective Mark Jenkins, deeply focused on his computer screen, was delving further into the complex details of the case. On the monitor in front of him was an open database where he searched for information on the mysterious Emily. But despite all his efforts, finding something concrete was proving difficult. The girl seemed to vanish every time they got close to a breakthrough. Mark pulled his eyes away from the screen and reached for the cup of cold coffee he had forgotten to drink. As he pondered the next steps, he suddenly remembered that one of the previously mentioned disappearances had peculiar circumstances linked to the occult. Could this be the key to solving the mystery? Frowning, Detective Jenkins dialed the number of his colleague from another department. Known for his expertise in strange and unexplained cases. On the other end of the line, the voice of Captain Jack Wilson, an expert in occult crimes, answered. Jack, hi, it's Mark. I need your help, Mark began, wasting no time on pleasantries. Hello, Mark, what's up? Wilson responded, his voice filled with interest. Do you remember the case of Jessica's disappearance that I told you about? Mark continued. We found out that the girl Jessica and her friends encountered at the mall might be linked to other disappearances. Recently, I came across information that this Emily was previously seen in occult circles. I think she might have been involved in some rituals. I need to understand what this could mean. There was a brief silence on the other end before Wilson spoke again. This sounds serious. If you have any data on her connections or activities, we could cross-check them with other similar cases. I'll see what we have on occult groups and rituals in the area. Mark nodded, even though Wilson couldn't see him. Great, I'll send you everything we've got. We also learned that Emily might be connected to 3 other disappearances. All of them happened in the last 6 months, and in each case, she was seen on surveillance cameras near the victims. Got it, Wilson replied. I'll run a cross-check and see if these disappearances are connected to any rituals or occult practices. We might find a pattern. After the conversation ended, Mark felt a slight release of tension. Although the situation was still frightening, he now had a plan. Now that they knew about Emily's connection to occult circles, they had a chance to uncover more details and possibly get closer to solving Jessica's disappearance. A few hours later, Wilson called back, his voice serious. Mark, I found something. Emily appears in an investigation related to a group calling themselves Keepers of the Forgotten. It's a small, secretive community that doesn't attract much attention but is known for its strange rituals and practices. Their rituals are aimed at what they claim is reconnecting with lost souls. Some members of this group have already come under police scrutiny, but proving their involvement in crimes has been difficult. Keepers of the Forgotten? Mark repeated, jotting down the name in his notebook. And what exactly do they do? Mostly various ceremonies and rituals related to spirits and the souls of the deceased. They claim they can help forgotten souls find peace, Wilson explained. However, what exactly is meant by forgotten souls remains unclear. Some members of this group have experienced strange disappearances or unexplained incidents, but again, there's a lack of evidence. It's possible Jessica became their next victim. Mark pondered this, biting his lip. If Emily was indeed part of this group, It could explain her strange behavior and the ominous ritual in the parking lot. Can we reach out to any former members of this group? Mark asked. Possibly, Wilson replied. I'll try to arrange a meeting with one of the former participants. If he agrees to talk, it could provide us with valuable clues. Great, Mark nodded. Have him contact us as soon as possible. After finishing the call, Mark felt that they were on the right track. Although the situation was still far from being solved, he finally had a chance to understand what was really going on. His next task was to figure out how the Keepers of the Forgotten were connected to the disappearances and what exactly they were up to. If this group was indeed responsible for Jessica's disappearance, Mark wouldn't stop until he pulled her out of the clutches of these occultists and put an end to their dangerous games with people's lives. Suddenly, Lisa vanished without a trace. The entire city was engulfed in anxiety, and each new day brought only an escalating sense of hopelessness. Sam barely slept, nervously fiddling with her phone in hopes of any news. Mark Jenkins threw himself into the investigation, chasing every possible lead. But despite all efforts, Lisa seemed to have disappeared into thin air, just like her friend Jessica before her. However, on the third day, early in the morning, the police received an unexpected call. Lisa had been found. She was discovered on the side of a highway outside the city, barefoot, and in the same clothes she was wearing when she vanished. She was in a state of deep shock and couldn't remember how she ended up there. When Lisa was brought to the hospital, Sam was the first to rush to her. Her heart was breaking with a mix of worry and relief, but when she saw her friend, her joy was overshadowed by concern. Lisa looked terrified and exhausted, her eyes glistening with tears but her gaze strangely vacant. Lisa, Sam exclaimed, rushing to her. Oh my God, are you okay? Where have you been? Lisa looked at Sam, but there was no recognition in her eyes. She shook her head, trying to remember something, but winced in pain each time, as if the memories brought her physical discomfort. I don't remember, she whispered. It's all foggy. I remember being at home. Then everything vanished. And then I woke up on the road. Sam gently took her hand, hoping to help her friend reconnect with reality. Don't worry, she said softly. You're safe. Everything will be okay. But at that moment, the door to the room opened, and Mark Jenkins walked in. His face was somber, but there was a spark of determination in his eyes. He nodded at Sam and then sat next to Lisa. Lisa, as you know, I'm investigating your disappearance and what happened to Jessica, he began calmly. I need to ask you a few questions. It's important. Lisa slowly nodded, but her eyes remained vacant, as if she was still somewhere far away. You say you don't remember what happened. That's okay, Mark continued. But is there anything you can recall? Any sounds, smells, images? Lisa shook her head again, her face reflecting deep confusion. No, she replied. Everything is foggy. I feel like a stranger in my own body. Something's not right. Mark furrowed his brow, trying to understand what was troubling her. What do you mean? He asked cautiously. Lisa hesitantly pulled up the sleeve of her shirt, revealing her forearm. Strange marks were visible on her skin, resembling symbols that looked like a mix of ancient runes and unfamiliar signs. They seemed to be burned into her body, leaving dark scars behind. I don't know what this is, Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. I don't feel pain, but these marks, they were there when I woke up. They scare me. Mark leaned in closer to examine the symbols and felt a shiver run down his spine. These marks were not random. He had seen something similar before, in reports of ritual sacrifices and occult ceremonies. What had they done to her? Lisa, I promise we'll find out what happened, Mark said seriously, pulling his gaze away from the symbols and back to her face. You're safe now, and we won't stop until we understand what happened to you. Lisa nervously nodded, clutching Sam's hand, who, in turn, struggled to hold back tears. Lisa sat in the dimly lit room, her hands trembling despite her attempts to remain calm. Mark Jenkins and Dr. Holly Freeman, an experienced hypnotherapist, were seated on either side of her. The room was silent, with only the faint ticking of a wall clock breaking the stillness. Lisa felt her chest tighten with anxiety, but she knew this was necessary. The only way to understand what had happened to her might be to delve into those foggy memories her mind had been trying so hard to forget. Dr. Freeman began speaking softly, her voice gentle and soothing, almost lullaby-like. Lisa, you are safe. We're just going to try to go back to the moment when you disappeared to understand what happened. I'll be with you throughout the session. If anything goes wrong, I'll bring you back to the present immediately. Just trust me and try to relax." Lisa nodded, feeling her eyelids grow heavy as Dr. Freeman's voice gently guided her deeper into her consciousness. "Now imagine you're going back in time." Dr. Freeman continued. "Picture yourself at the moment when everything started. You are safe. What do you see?" Lisa sighed, her voice sounding raspy as if it were coming from far away. I'm at home," she began, her voice quivering. "I'm alone. It's night. Dark. The room is quiet, but I hear rustling, some sounds. Strange sounds." "What kind of sounds? Describe them," Dr. Freeman asked gently. "It's like someone is whispering." Lisa frowned, trying to recall more details. "I get out of bed. I walk down the hallway. It's dark, but I see shadows. They're moving, as if something is hiding in the darkness." "What are these shadows? Do they seem familiar to you?" Dr. Freeman inquired. Lisa froze, her breathing becoming uneven. "They're figures," she whispered. "They're dark, shapeless, like they're made of darkness itself. They're reaching out to me, their hands cold. I try to run, but they're getting closer." Mark and Dr. Freeman exchanged worried glances but did not interrupt Lisa. "And then I hear her," Lisa's voice faltered, gripping the armrests of the chair tighter. "Jessica. She's calling my name. I don't see her, but I know it's her. She's nearby. I hear her screaming. She's calling me over and over, and. Lisa pressed her lips together, trying to hold back tears. She's scared. I can feel her fear. I want to find her, but I can't move. The shadows. They're holding me back. I scream, but there's no sound. Just those strange whispers in her voice. Then everything disappears. Darkness. And nothing more." For a moment, the room fell into deep silence. Lisa breathed heavily, her face glistening with cold sweat. Dr. Freeman gently guided her out of the trance, bringing her back to reality. Lisa opened her eyes, still looking lost. Her gaze wandered around the room until she focused on Mark's face. "Jessica." "She was there," Lisa whispered, her voice hoarse. "She was calling me, she was scared. I know it wasn't just a dream." Mark nodded, trying to mask his concern. "You did well, Lisa," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We'll find her." Lisa looked at him with despair in her eyes but nodded nonetheless. For Mark, this was another piece of evidence that the events affecting the girls went beyond the ordinary. In recent days, Mark and his team had received crucial evidence pointing to Emily's whereabouts. After an in-depth analysis of all available data, they discovered that the girl was likely hiding in an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city, rumored to be a site associated with occult activities. The abandoned house, situated on an old, desolate plot, looked ominous. Giant trees and shrubs surrounded it, concealing the facade from prying eyes. The windows were boarded up, and the doors were barricaded. Once majestic and beautiful, the house now appeared grim and forsaken, as if it had always been meant for something sinister. Mark and his team gathered in the main operations room, where large screens displayed maps and photographs of the area. Officer Benson, a specialist in tactical operations, was checking the equipment while Mark examined the map, marking possible entrances and exits. "We need to be careful," Mark said to his team. "Emily might be armed or using primitive traps. We need to approach the house quietly and simultaneously to prevent her from escaping." The squad, consisting of several well-trained police officers and special unit personnel, was ready for action. Each member was equipped with night vision gear and safety equipment. Mark and his team crossed the city limits and headed towards the abandoned house. The weather was cold, and the wind rustled dry leaves, creating eerie sounds in the night silence. They approached the house cautiously, like shadows. When they reached the building, Mark ordered the team to split into two groups, one to circle the house and check all possible exits, and the other to enter and begin the search. Mark led the second group. On signal, the team entered the house through the front door, which had been forced open with several blows from a crowbar. Inside, it was pitch dark, and they turned on their flashlights. The interior was even gloomier than the outside. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dust, the furniture was draped in cobwebs, and the air was filled with a musty odor. Mark surveyed the room and noticed something strange on the floor. Pictures and symbols carved into the floor formed intricate patterns. He knew these were not just random drawings. They were symbols he had seen before in reports on occult practices. "Stay alert," he whispered, moving further into the house. The team proceeded cautiously, examining rooms one by one. In one dark room, Mark noticed a slightly ajar door behind which faint sounds could be heard. He signaled to the team, and they silently approached the door. Mark carefully opened it, revealing a scene that filled him with unease. In the room, candles were arranged on the floor, and in the center was a circle of the same symbols seen in the hallway. Inside the circle stood Emily, dressed in a long dark gown. She looked directly at them with an expression of complete calm and even serenity, despite the situation. "Emily," Mark said loudly and firmly. "We've come for you. Drop everything and come out with your hands up." Emily didn't move, her eyes seemed fixed on some internal vision. Suddenly, her lips began to move, and she spoke words that sounded like an incantation. The candles started flickering, and strange noises filled the room. "Bring all units," Mark ordered. "Don't let her get away." The team quickly entered the room, and despite Emily's resistance, they were able to restrain her. Once her incantation was interrupted, the candles extinguished, and the room fell into complete silence. Mark looked at Emily, who was now in handcuffs and appeared as if she had just woken from a deep sleep. "Why?" he asked, restraining his anger. "Why did you do all this?" Emily looked at him with a slight smirk, but her eyes were filled with despair. "You don't understand," she said. "It was necessary. Everything I did was part of a larger plan. It's not just a ritual. It's an attempt to regain what was lost." Several hours had passed since the operation began, and the tension was mounting. Every room and every nook had been thoroughly searched, but the eerie feeling that the gloomy house still harbored terrifying secrets persisted. Finally, they found what they were looking for. In one of the far rooms, amidst dim light and strange symbols, lay Jessica and several other missing people. They were in a semi-conscious state, bound, and unable to move. Their bodies were exhausted, but they were still alive. "Oh God," Sam whispered upon seeing Jessica. Her face was pale, but her features were still recognizable. She barely moved, and tears welled up in Sam's eyes. "Jessica," Sam and Mark hurried to her. Mark checked Jessica's pulse and confirmed that she was still alive, though her condition was serious. He immediately gave orders for the evacuation of all victims and for them to receive medical assistance. While the medics attended to Jessica and the others, Mark moved to the center of the room, where Emily, after her arrest, sat on the floor, handcuffed to pipes. Her face was calm and almost serene, as if nothing was happening. "Emily," Mark said, tilting her chin to meet her gaze. "We've found the missing people." "Why?" Emily looked at him with an evident lack of emotion. Her eyes were vacant, as if she was in another world. "I don't understand what you're talking about," she replied, her voice calm and even. "I merely performed a cleansing ritual. Nothing more." Mark frowned. His patience was wearing thin. He understood that Emily might either be pretending or genuinely not grasping the seriousness of the situation. "We know you're involved in the disappearances of these people," Mark said. "And we know your actions led to their condition. So we need to know the truth. Why did you do this?" Emily was silent for a while, then her gaze became even more vacant. "They were lost," she said, her voice growing soft and strange. "I tried to bring them back. They weren't supposed to leave. I tried to save them from oblivion." Mark didn't know what to make of her words. Her behavior was increasingly confusing. And she clearly wasn't in her right mind. "You'll stay here," Mark said, gesturing to the guards who brought Emily to the center of the room. "I intend to find out what really happened. For now, we need to ensure the safety of all those affected." Emily nodded, but her eyes were full of bewilderment. There was no hint of guilt or fear in her demeanor. It was as if her own world was completely detached from the reality in which her victims found themselves. Mark turned back to Sam, who, still shaken, watched Jessica, waiting for her to regain consciousness. There was determination in her eyes, but also exhaustion. Sam held herself together, understanding that there was still a long road ahead for recovery and justice. Evening once again enveloped the city, but for Mark Jenkins, this day was far from ordinary. In laboratories and investigation offices, evidence was being sifted through, and results were starting to come in. Forensic experts and occult specialists were working on analyzing the information gathered from the operation at the abandoned house. One of the investigators brought Mark the results of the analysis of the symbols and materials found in the house. On his desk lay folders with reports and scans of ancient texts that seemed to reveal key details about Emily and her associates' rituals. Overwhelmed with papers and notes, Mark reviewed the reports. One of the occult experts, Dr. Rebecca Morgan, approached him with important news. "Mark, we've made a breakthrough in our research," she said, placing a document before him. "We've discovered that Emily was part of an occult group specializing in rituals aimed at cleansing souls. These aren't just random actions but part of a larger plan." Mark glanced at the document, which described the rituals and ceremonies performed by the group. With each word, his understanding deepened, and the picture began to come together. "What do we know about the group?" Mark asked. "They call themselves the Guides," Dr. Morgan replied. "Their doctrine is based on the idea that people's souls can be cleansed through rituals they perform. They believe that cleansing allows souls to transition to a higher level of existence. In their rituals, they use symbols and incantations to bind souls and guide them to this higher state." Mark frowned. The idea that someone could use such dangerous methods under the guise of spiritual cleansing was hard to grasp. "And what does this mean for Jessica and the others?" Mark asked. "They were chosen randomly," Dr. Morgan explained. "In their system, there are fresh souls that need to be used in their rituals. It's a form of sacrifice to achieve their goals. Jessica and the others we found were chosen randomly as new victims for the ritual." Mark felt his irritation and anger intensify. "And what now?" Mark asked. "What actions should we take?" Dr. Morgan nodded and continued. "We need to gather more information about the group and their rituals. We might have a chance to prevent further victims if we can dismantle their network and understand where they might be located." Mark considered her words and decided to conduct another interrogation with Emily. He believed that, despite her strange behavior, she might reveal more details about the group and their plans. For this, he would need to use all his skills and patience. When Mark approached the cell where Emily was held, he was determined. Emily sat alone, her gaze vacant, as if lost in her own thoughts. "Emily," he began, "we need answers. We've determined that you were part of a group performing cleansing rituals. We know that Jessica and others were chosen randomly as fresh souls. We need to understand how your group operates and who else is involved." Emily raised her eyes and looked at Mark with slight interest. She seemed tired, but her eyes held an invisible fire. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "We release souls from the chains of this world, from everything that keeps them here. You cannot understand it until you see it yourself." Mark sighed. "We'll continue the investigation, but if you have anything else to say, you'd better do it now." Emily remained silent, but her eyes stayed intensely focused. Mark knew her silence might conceal important details that could help uncover the full truth about the group and their rituals. As Mark continued working on the case, he understood there was still much hard work ahead. But each step brought him closer to uncovering the full picture, and he was ready to do whatever it took to stop the group and protect those who might still become victims. After a long period of treatment and psychological rehabilitation, Lisa and Jessica began to return to their everyday routines. Lisa went back to her job at the cafe, while Jessica, though with difficulty, started to recover and reconnect with friends. However, even the most ordinary moments were tinged with unsettling memories. One day, Lisa and Jessica met at a local cafe where they used to spend time frequently. The atmosphere was casual, and they tried to act normally, but the internal tension was evident on both their faces. "How are you feeling?" Lisa asked, attempting to sound carefree. Her smile was strained, and her eyes, despite her efforts, revealed fatigue. "I'm okay," Jessica replied, taking a sip of her coffee. "We're kind of getting back to normal life, but it's not easy. I keep thinking about what happened." Lisa nodded, her gaze drifting around, trying to find some peace in the familiar surroundings. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "Sometimes it seems like if I close my eyes, it all happens again. Those symbols, the rituals. It all comes back in my dreams." Jessica sighed and looked at her friend. Her face was calm, but there was a shadow of fear and anxiety in her eyes. "Maybe we should talk to someone about this?" she suggested, though her voice sounded uncertain. Lisa shook her head. "I don't think it would help. We've already done everything we could to deal with it. It's better to just move forward and try to forget. After all, we need positive emotions and at least a bit of normalcy. Yeah, Jessica agreed. We'll start small. We'll work on getting our lives back on track and try not to talk about it anymore. Both understood that they would never be able to fully forget what had happened, but they were willing to do whatever it took to return to their normal lives. Moreover, it was their decision not to share their experiences or discuss what had happened with others. It was their way of preserving a piece of normalcy in their lives. In the evening, Lisa and Jessica said their goodbyes and left the cafe, heading to their homes. The city was bustling with life and activity, but for them, despite the lively streets, everything remained overshadowed by their personal experiences. The sun had already set below the horizon, and the mall was bustling with evening activity. Shoppers, finishing their last purchases, filled the corridors. Everything seemed normal, in the rhythm of daily life. However, in one corner of this busy place, events began to unfold that could change everything. Emily, now dressed in a new outfit and under a different name, appeared in the mall. Her fresh appearance was far removed from her former self. She wore a stylish, modern suit and a neat wig that completely altered her look. Her eyes sparkled with a confident smile, and her demeanor was calm and nonchalant. Mark Jenkins, who had been working on Emily's case, was also in the mall, but he was lost in his thoughts and not paying attention to his surroundings. Emily approached one of the merchandise stands and began conversing with a young couple who were examining various items. Her voice was soft and confident, with a hint of magnetism. "Hi," she said with a charming smile. "I see you're looking for something special. Perhaps you're interested in a purification ritual? It will help you align with positive changes and open new horizons." The young couple looked at her with a mix of curiosity and puzzlement, but they were clearly drawn to her charm. "A purification ritual?" the girl repeated, her voice tinged with curiosity and a hint of skepticism. "Is it something like meditation or something along those lines?" Emily nodded, her smile unwavering. "Yes, exactly. It's a special ritual that will help you release negative emotions and find inner peace. You'll be surprised at how it can transform your life." The couple, noticing Emily's calm and confident demeanor, followed her with interest toward the exit.